The summer sun beat down on Carter's Creek, making the water sparkle like diamonds scattered across its surface. Staff Sergeant James Cooper sat on a worn wooden bench near the water's edge, his military dog tags catching the sunlight as they hung around his neck. He had found this peaceful swimming hole 3 weeks after returning from his third tour in Afghanistan, and it had quickly become his favorite spot to unwind. At 32 years old, Cooper's face showed the experience of someone who had seen too much too soon. His short black hair was growing out from its military cut, and his green eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, a habit he couldn't shake after years of combat training. Even here, in this quiet corner of Tennessee, those instincts never left him. The swimming hole was perfect today. A few families splashed in the deeper parts of the creek, their children's laughter echoing off the surrounding trees. Some teenagers were taking turns jumping from a rope swing on the opposite bank, while an elderly couple sat in folding chairs beneath a large oak tree, fishing poles propped against the trunk. Cooper opened his worn copy of The Old Man and the Sea, a book he had carried with him through 3 deployments. The pages were dog-eared and water-stained, but they felt like old friends. He had changed into swimming trunks and a plain white t-shirt that revealed the strong build of a career soldier, though he wasn't trying to intimidate anyone. All he wanted was a peaceful afternoon. A cool breeze rustled through the trees, bringing with it the sweet smell of honeysuckle. Cooper took a deep breath, allowing himself to relax slightly. These moments were precious to him, especially after spending so much time in the dusty heat of combat zones. The sound of water lapping against the shore and children playing reminded him of why he had fought so hard to protect this way of life. As he read his book, Cooper couldn't help but notice a young family setting up their picnic nearby. A father was teaching his small son how to skip stones across the water's surface, while the mother spread out a checkered blanket. It reminded him of his own childhood in Montana, where his father had taught him the same thing on the banks of a different creek. The peaceful scene stirred memories in Cooper's mind. He remembered his team members from the Special Forces, especially those who hadn't made it back. Sometimes he felt guilty enjoying simple pleasures like this when they couldn't. His therapist had told him this was normal, survivor's guilt, she called it, and encouraged him to embrace these peaceful moments as a way to honor their sacrifice. Cooper set his book down and walked to the water's edge. The creek bed was lined with smooth stones, and the water was crystal clear. You can see small fish darting between the rocks, unbothered by the humans enjoying their domain. The water was cool against his feet, offering relief from the hot Tennessee summer day. He waded deeper into the creek, his trained senses still alert despite the relaxed environment. The water reached his waist, and he ducked under for a moment, enjoying the silence beneath the surface. When he came up, water running down his face, he noticed dark clouds gathering in the distance. A storm was coming, but it was still a few hours away. The swimming hole had its own rhythm throughout the day. Cooper had observed it during his previous visits. In the morning, it belonged to the elderly folks who came to fish. By mid-morning, young families would arrive with their picnic baskets and excited children. The afternoon usually brought teenagers and young couples, while the evening belonged to those seeking solitude, people like him. As he returned to his bench, Cooper checked his watch, 2:15 p.m. He had another few hours before he needed to head back to his small apartment. Tomorrow, he would start his new job as a security consultant at a local firm. It wasn't the same as serving with his unit, but it would keep his skills sharp while allowing him to build a civilian life. Cooper picked up his book again, but something made him pause. Years of combat experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, something felt off. Maybe it was the way the birds had suddenly gone quiet, or perhaps it was the slight change in the atmosphere. He kept his posture relaxed but increased his awareness, his eyes scanning the tree line while appearing to read his book. In the distance, he heard it. The growing rumble of multiple motorcycles approaching the swimming hole's access road. The sound was getting louder, and Cooper knew his peaceful afternoon was about to change. He marked his page and set the book aside, preparing himself for whatever was coming. The peaceful atmosphere at Carter's Creek shattered as 5 motorcycles roared into the parking area, their engines echoing off the surrounding trees. Cooper watched as the riders dismounted their bikes, their leather vests displaying patches that read "Iron Wolves." He had heard about this group, troublemakers who had been causing problems in nearby counties. The leader of the group, a massive man who went by the name Tank, stood at least 6'4" and looked to weigh close to 300 pounds. His arms were covered in tattoos, and a thick beard couldn't hide the sneer on his face as he surveyed the swimming hole. 4 other bikers flanked him, each wearing similar leather vests and carrying themselves with an air of intimidation. The young family near Cooper quickly began packing their picnic. The father kept glancing nervously at the bikers while hurrying his wife and son. Cooper understood their concern. He had seen that look of fear in civilians' eyes before, though usually in war zones, not at a peaceful swimming hole in Tennessee. Well, what do we have here? Tank's voice boomed across the water as he and his gang made their way down to the creek. The teenagers at the rope swing stopped their fun, whispering among themselves. The elderly couple by the oak tree slowly began gathering their fishing gear, trying not to draw attention. Cooper remained seated on his bench, appearing relaxed but mentally noting each biker's position and movement patterns. 2 of them, younger members with matching snake tattoos on their necks, began kicking sand at some nearby children, laughing as the kids ran crying to their parents. "Looks like we found ourselves a private swimming hole, boys," Tank announced, spreading his arms wide. "Ain't that right, old-timer?" He directed this at the elderly man who was helping his wife with their chairs. The old man lowered his eyes and moved faster, his hands shaking slightly. The bikers began their routine, a practice Cooper recognized from his military intelligence briefings about gang intimidation tactics. They spread out, creating a sense of being surrounded. One of them, a skinny man with a scarred face, cranked up a portable speaker, filling the air with heavy metal music that drowned out the natural sounds of the creek. Within 10 minutes, most of the families had left. The teenagers had abandoned their rope swing, leaving behind towels in their hurry to escape. Only Cooper remained, still sitting on his bench, his book now closed beside him. He watched as Tank and his crew celebrated their success in clearing the swimming hole. "Hey, check out G.I. Joe over here," called out one of the snake-tattooed bikers, pointing at Cooper's dog tags. "Think he's too brave to leave?" Tank turned his attention to Cooper, studying him with amusement. To Tank, Cooper probably looked like an easy target, alone, of medium build, seemingly absorbed in his book. It was a mistake many had made before, underestimating the quiet soldier. "Those are some nice dog tags you got there, boy," Tank said, walking closer to Cooper's bench. The other bikers formed a loose circle, their boots kicking up sand as they moved. "Maybe you'd like to donate them to our collection?" Cooper remained silent, his green eyes tracking each movement around him. He noticed how the skinny biker with the speaker had a slight limp favoring his left leg, how one of the snake-tattooed guys kept his right hand near his belt, possibly concealing a weapon, how Tank, despite his size, was already breathing heavily from the short walk in the heat. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the swimming hole as dark clouds continued gathering in the distance. The water that had looked so inviting earlier now lay still and dark, as if the creek itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "What's wrong, soldier boy?" Tank taunted, moving even closer. "Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you're just scared?" His gang laughed on cue, the sound echoing off the water's surface. Cooper finally stood up, his movements smooth and controlled. He took off his reading glasses, carefully folding them and placing them on top of his book. The dog tags clinked softly against his chest as he turned to face Tank directly. "I think," Cooper said quietly, his voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who had faced far worse than parking lot bullies, "that you gentlemen might want to reconsider your current course of action." Tank's laugh echoed across the now empty swimming hole. "Did you hear that, boys?" he called out to his gang. "The soldier boy wants us to reconsider our actions." The other bikers joined in the laughter, but Cooper noticed how the 2 with snake tattoos exchanged uncertain glances. They had caught something in his voice that their leader had missed. Cooper stood perfectly still, his feet shoulder-width apart, hands relaxed at his sides. To most people, he might have looked casual, but anyone with combat experience would have recognized his stance. He was perfectly positioned to react in any direction. The growing tension reminded him of moments before firefights in Afghanistan, that electric silence before everything exploded into action. "You got 2 choices here, soldier," Tank growled, stepping closer until he was just a few feet from Cooper. His breath smelled of cheap beer and cigarettes. "You can hand over those dog tags and whatever cash you got, then run away like everyone else. Or," he cracked his knuckles for effect, "we can do this the hard way." The skinny biker with the speaker had turned the music off, sensing that something important was about to happen. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the storm clouds grew darker. A few drops of rain began to fall, creating small ripples on the creek's surface. Actually, Cooper replied calmly, "You have two choices." His green eyes locked onto Tank's, and for the first time, the big biker saw something there that made him pause. The steady, unflinching gaze of someone who had faced death many times and wasn't impressed by parking lot bullies. "You can leave now, head to a different swimming hole, and we all go home without trouble. Or you can try what you're thinking about trying, and I'll have to show you why that's a very poor decision." One of the snake-tattooed bikers spoke up, his voice carrying a note of concern. "Tank, maybe we should." "Shut up!" Tank barked, his face reddening with anger. Nobody had ever stood up to him at the swimming hole before, and he wasn't about to let some soldier boy ruin his reputation. "Get behind him," he ordered the others. "Nobody makes a fool of the Iron Wolves." The four other bikers began to move, spreading out to surround Cooper. He remained motionless except for his eyes, which tracked their movements with practiced precision. He noted how the skinny one with the limp was favoring his left side even more now, how the nervous one kept looking at Tank instead of watching his own sector. These weren't trained fighters. They were bullies used to overwhelming scared civilians with numbers and noise. "Last chance," Cooper said quietly, barely audible over another roll of thunder. Rain was falling steadily now, drawing dark spots on the sandy ground around them. "Walk away." Tank's response was to reach for Cooper's dog tags. His meaty hand shot out, aiming to grab the metal chain around Cooper's neck. It was the kind of aggressive move that had worked countless times before, except this time, it was exactly what Cooper had been waiting for. Before Tank's fingers could close around the dog tags, Cooper's left hand shot up, catching the bigger man's wrist in a grip that felt like steel cables. Tank's eyes widened in surprise. Nobody had ever moved that fast against him before. "What the?" Tank started to say, but Cooper was already moving. In one fluid motion, he stepped to the side, using Tank's own momentum and weight against him. The big biker suddenly found himself stumbling forward, his balance completely gone. The other four bikers started to move in, but they hesitated, unsure of what they were seeing. Their leader, the man they had seen throw grown men around like rag dolls, was being controlled by simple movements they could barely follow. "This," Cooper said in the same calm voice, "is your final warning." He released Tank's wrist, allowing the bigger man to stumble back, confusion and anger warring on his face. "I've spent 12 years in special forces, with 3 tours in combat zones. I'm trained to handle multiple opponents in close-quarter situations. If you continue this, I will defend myself, and I promise you won't enjoy the outcome." Rain poured down now, soaking everyone as lightning flashed across the darkened sky. Tank rubbed his wrist, feeling the strength that had been in Cooper's grip. For a moment, doubt crept into his eyes, but then he looked at his gang, and pride went out over wisdom. "Get him!" Tank roared, and all 5 bikers moved in at once. What happened next seemed impossible to the few remaining onlookers watching from the safety of their cars in the parking lot. Cooper's movements were so fast and smooth that they almost looked choreographed, like a deadly dance in the pouring rain. As all 5 bikers rushed him at once, Cooper stepped forward instead of back, the opposite of what they expected. His right elbow caught the first snake-tattooed biker in the solar plexus, folding him over with a whoosh of expelled air. In the same fluid motion, Cooper's left hand grabbed the man's leather vest and redirected him into the path of his twin brother, sending both sprawling into the wet sand. The skinny biker with the limp tried to throw a wild punch from Cooper's left side. The soldier simply wasn't there anymore, having shifted his weight slightly. The biker's momentum carried him forward, and Cooper helped him along with a gentle push, adding just enough force to send him face first into the shallow water of the creek. 3 seconds, Cooper counted quietly, 3 opponents down. Tank roared in fury and charged like a bull, while his remaining friend attempted to grab Cooper from behind. But Cooper had fought in conditions far worse than this, in darkness, in sandstorms, in mountain passes where one wrong step meant death. A rain-soaked swimming hole was practically luxury. He waited until the last possible moment, then sidestepped Tank's charge with the precision of a matador. Tank's massive arm swung through empty air as Cooper moved inside his guard. 2 quick strikes to pressure points on Tank's massive arm. movements so fast they were barely visible, and suddenly the big man's right arm hung useless at his side. "What did you do to my arm?" Tank bellowed, his face a mask of rage and confusion. "I can't feel my arm." "Nerve cluster manipulation," Cooper explained calmly, ducking under a wild swing from the last standing biker. "The feeling will return in about 10 minutes. He caught the other biker's arm and applied precise pressure to the wrist, causing the man to drop to his knees with a yelp of pain. The snake-tattooed twins had managed to get back to their feet, but they were having second thoughts. They had never seen anyone move like this, had never encountered someone who could handle multiple attackers with such ease. They looked at each other, then at their fallen friends, and began backing away. "Don't you dare run," Tank shouted at them, trying to lift his deadened arm. "Get him." Cooper sighed. Some people never learned. As the twins reluctantly moved forward again, he decided to end this quickly. He stepped between them, his hands moving in quick, precise strikes to nerve clusters in their shoulders and legs. Both brothers dropped to the sand, their limbs suddenly refusing to cooperate. "Simple pressure point techniques," Cooper explained to their shocked faces. "You'll recover in a few minutes. I suggest you use that time to reconsider your life choices." The skinny biker had managed to get his face out of the creek and was crawling backward, coughing up water. The one Cooper had wrist-locked was still on his knees, cradling his arm. Tank stood alone now, his massive frame heaving with exertion and rage, one arm hanging uselessly at his side. "You're some kind of freak," Tank spat, but Cooper heard the fear creeping into his voice. "No," Cooper replied, his voice still calm despite not even being out of breath. "I'm just a soldier who's had excellent training and years of real combat experience. The kind of experience that makes dealing with bullies like you almost embarrassingly easy." Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the scene. 5 tough bikers, all taken down in less than a minute by one man who hadn't even thrown a proper punch. Cooper hadn't used any lethal techniques, hadn't even caused any serious injury. He had simply neutralized the threat with minimal force, just as his training had taught him. "Now," Cooper said, looking at each of them in turn, "I'm going to give you all one more chance to leave quietly. Or," he shifted his weight slightly, causing all 5 men to flinch. "We can continue this discussion, though I don't recommend that option." The rain continued to pour down as Tank looked at his fallen crew, his reputation washing away with the rainwater. In the distance, police sirens could be heard approaching the swimming hole. Someone in the parking lot must have called them when the fight started. Tank's face twisted with humiliation as he made his decision. Tank's pride went out over his common sense. With a roar of rage, he charged at Cooper again, his good arm swinging in a wild haymaker. The rain had made the ground slippery, and Tank's boots struggled to find traction in the wet sand. Cooper didn't move until the last possible second. Then, like water flowing around a rock, he shifted just enough for Tank's punch to miss. The big biker's momentum carried him forward, and Cooper helped him along with a simple redirection technique. Tank went flying past him, his feet sliding out from under him on the slick ground. "You had your chance," Cooper said quietly, watching as Tank crashed face first into the sand. "Now we'll have to do this the hard way." The snake-tattooed twins were starting to regain feeling in their limbs. They looked at each other, then at their fallen leader, and made a decision. They scrambled to their feet and ran toward the parking lot, leaving their fellow gang members behind. "Cowards!" Tank shouted after them, pushing himself up with his good arm. His face was covered in wet sand, and his eyes burned with humiliation. "Come back here." The skinny biker with the limp had managed to get back on his feet, but he stayed where he was, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. The 5th biker was still nursing his wrist, all thoughts of fighting apparently forgotten. Cooper stood calmly in the rain, his white t-shirt now soaked through, showing the combat-hardened muscles beneath. His dog tags glinted in another flash of lightning as Tank turned to face him again. "You think you're better than us?" Tank snarled, trying to flex his numbed arm. "You think your fancy military training makes you special?" "No," Cooper replied, his voice carrying clearly over the rain. "I think my training taught me discipline, respect, and how to handle myself in a fight. Things you clearly never learned." The police sirens were getting closer now. Tank looked toward the parking lot, then back at Cooper. His reputation was in shambles, his gang scattered, and now he faced the choice between retreat and arrest. "This isn't over," Tank growled, backing away toward his motorcycle. "You haven't seen the last of us." Cooper simply watched as Tank stumbled backward, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. The big biker's leather vest was covered in sand, and his useless arm swung at his side as he moved. "Actually," Cooper said, "I think I have, because if you ever come back here..." He let the sentence hang in the air, but his calm green eyes carried the message clearly enough. This wasn't a threat, it was a promise. The skinny biker had already started limping toward his bike, and the one with the injured wrist was close behind him. Tank watched them go, his face twisted with anger and shame. Two police cruisers pulled into the parking lot, their red and blue lights flashing through the rain. The remaining bikers moved faster now, desperate to reach their motorcycles before the officers could stop them. Cooper stayed where he was, hands relaxed at his sides, watching as Tank finally turned and ran. The big man's boots slipped in the wet sand several times as he fled, his usual swagger completely gone. From the parking lot came the sound of motorcycles starting up and peeling out onto the road. The police car's lights illuminated the swimming hole as two officers approached, their hands on their holsters. "Sir," one of them called out to Cooper. "Are you all right? We got calls about a disturbance." Cooper nodded, reaching down to pick up his book from the bench. The rain had mostly stopped now, and patches of blue sky were visible through the breaking clouds. "Everything's fine, officers," he said, brushing some sand off his copy of The Old Man and the Sea. "Just had to explain some manners to a few visitors. I don't think they'll be causing any more trouble here." The officers looked around the empty swimming hole, noting the signs of struggle in the sand. One of them recognized Cooper from around town and nodded knowingly. "You're that Special Forces veteran, aren't you?" he asked. "The one who just moved here?" Cooper smiled slightly, tucking his book under his arm. "Yes, sir, just trying to enjoy a peaceful afternoon swim." The next morning, Cooper sat in the local police station, finishing up his statement about the incident at the swimming hole. Officer Mike Thompson, a veteran himself who had served in the Marines, listened with growing respect as Cooper described the events. "So you didn't throw a single punch?" Thompson asked, looking up from his notepad. The morning sun streamed through the station's windows, glinting off his badge. "Just used pressure points and redirections." Cooper nodded, his hands wrapped around a cup of station coffee. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a clean blue button-down shirt, looking more like an office worker than someone who had taken down 5 bikers the day before. "In Special Forces, they teach us to use minimal force whenever possible," Cooper explained. "The goal is to end the confrontation quickly while causing the least amount of permanent damage. Those men were bullies, not trained fighters. They didn't need to be seriously hurt to be stopped." The door to the interview room opened, and Chief Roberts walked in. He was a tall man with gray hair and eyes that had seen plenty in his 30 years of law enforcement. He carried a thick file folder under his arm. "Well, Sergeant Cooper," the chief said, sitting down across from him, "you'll be happy to know we've identified all 5 members of the Iron Wolves who were involved yesterday. Turns out they've been causing trouble across 3 counties." He opened the folder and spread out several photographs on the table. They showed Tank and his gang intimidating people at other locations, a diner, a gas station, another swimming spot. Cooper looked at the images without comment. "The interesting thing," Chief Roberts continued, "is that after yesterday, they seem to have had a change of heart. This morning, Tank, or Gerald Matthews, which is his real name, came in with 3 of his men. They wanted to officially apologize for their behavior and accept whatever consequences come their way." Cooper raised an eyebrow. This wasn't what he had expected to hear. Officer Thompson let out a low whistle of surprise. "According to Matthews," the chief said, reading from a statement, "having his gang thoroughly defeated by one man who didn't even throw a punch made him realize how foolish their behavior has been. He said, and I quote, 'That soldier showed us what real strength and discipline look like.'" The morning traffic outside created a gentle background noise as Cooper absorbed this information. He remembered the look in Tank's eyes just before he ran away, not just fear or anger, but something else. Maybe it had been the first glimpse of understanding. "They've agreed to pay for any damages at the swimming hole," Chief Roberts went on, though there wasn't much besides some scattered belongings and trampled sand. They're also going to perform community service at the local Veterans Center. Matthews specifically requested that. Cooper nodded slowly, a small smile touching his lips. Sometimes the best lessons came from unexpected places. He thought about his own training, about the mentors who had taught him that true strength wasn't about dominance or fear. There's something else, Officer Thompson added, checking his phone. Word about what happened has spread around town. The swimming hole was packed this morning. Families, kids, elderly folks. They're calling it the safest spot in the county now. Chief Roberts gathered up the photos and closed his folder. We won't need anything else from you, Sergeant. You handled the situation perfectly, protected the public without causing any serious injuries. Wish all our cases racked up this clean. Cooper stood up, ready to head to his new job at the security firm. The events of yesterday already felt distant, like another training exercise completed successfully. One last thing, Chief Roberts said as Cooper reached the door. My son, he's thinking about joining the military. Would you mind if he talked to you sometime? After what I've seen and heard, I can't think of a better example of what a soldier should be. Cooper paused, touched by the request. He thought about his own mentors, about the lessons they had passed on to him. Maybe it was time to pass those lessons on to others. I'd be honored, Chief, he replied. Tell him he can find me at the swimming hole most afternoons. It's a good place to talk. A week after the incident at the swimming hole, Cooper sat at his usual bench, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The evening was peaceful, with families enjoying the cool water and teenagers taking turns on the rope swing. Everything had changed since the confrontation with the Iron Wolves, yet somehow everything felt more natural than ever. A familiar rumble of motorcycles approached, but this time it didn't bring tension to the swimming hole. Tank, now going by his real name, Gerald, pulled up in the parking lot with two of his former gang members. They weren't wearing their Iron Wolves vests anymore, instead dressed in plain t-shirts and jeans. Cooper watched as they walked down to the swimming hole, carrying trash bags and pickup tools, part of their community service. The other swimmers, who had heard the story of what happened, didn't run away this time. Some even nodded hello to the former troublemakers. Evening, Sergeant Cooper, Gerald said respectfully as they passed his bench. The massive man looked different now. His face had lost its angry edge, and his eyes carried a hint of humility that hadn't been there before. Mind if we talk for a minute? Cooper gestured to the empty space on the bench. Gerald sat down while his two companions started picking up litter around the swimming hole. The wooden bench creaked under Gerald's weight, but he seemed more comfortable here than he had been a week ago. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, Gerald began, watching the sunset reflect off the creek's surface. About how you handled all of us without really hurting anyone. Could have done a lot worse to us, but you didn't. Cooper nodded, letting the man speak. Sometimes the most important part of teaching was knowing when to listen. I was in county for a few years, Gerald continued. Learned to fight in there. Thought it made me tough, you know. But what you did, that was different. That was control. Discipline. He paused, searching for the right words. That was real strength. A group of children ran past them, laughing as they chased each other with water guns. Gerald watched them with a thoughtful expression, very different from the sneer he would have worn a week ago. The Veterans Center where we're doing our service, Gerald said. They got some guys there dealing with rough stuff. PTSD, anger issues. Kind of like what I got, I guess. In talking to them, learning about what they went through. He turned to look at Cooper directly. Made me realize I've been using my anger all wrong. Cooper set his book aside, giving Gerald his full attention. Anger isn't always bad, he said. It's like any other tool, depends on how you use it. The trick is controlling it instead of letting it control you. Gerald nodded slowly. That's what I wanted to ask you about, actually. Some of the vets at the center, they're starting this program. Teaching discipline through martial arts, focusing on control instead of aggression. They asked if I'd help out, work with some of the younger guys who might end up like I did. A small smile crossed Cooper's face. He remembered his own instructors, how they had channeled his young soldiers' aggression into something more controlled, more purposeful. They said having someone who's been on the wrong path might help reach these kids, Gerald continued. Show them there's a better way, but I figured, maybe I should learn the right way myself first. He took a deep breath. Would you be willing to teach me? Not the fighting stuff, I mean the discipline, the control, the things that make a real warrior. The last rays of sunlight sparkled on the water as Cooper considered the request. He looked at Gerald's former gang members, now carefully picking up trash and chatting with some of the local families. Then he looked at Gerald himself, a man who had found the courage to change. Training starts at 6 a.m., Cooper said finally. Here at the swimming hole, we'll begin with meditation and basic forms. It's not going to be easy. Relief and determination crossed Gerald's face. Yes, sir, he said, standing up. I'll be here. As Gerald walked away to join his friends, Cooper picked up his book again. The swimming hole had become more than just a place of peace for him. It had become a place of transformation. 1 month after the incident that changed everything, Carter's Creek swimming hole had become a very different place. The early morning sun was just rising over the trees as Cooper led a group of 12 students through their morning exercises. Among them were Gerald, formerly known as Tank, his 2 former gang members, and several young men from the Veterans Center. The group moved in perfect synchronization, following Cooper's calm instructions as they practiced controlled breathing and basic martial arts forms. Their bare feet pressed into the cool sand as morning mist rose from the creek's surface. It was hard to believe that just a month ago, this same spot had been the scene of a confrontation. Remember? Cooper said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. These movements aren't about fighting. They're about finding balance in your body and in your mind. He walked between the students, making small corrections to their stances. Power without control is just chaos. Control without purpose is just restraint. We're looking for the balance between them. Gerald, who had not missed a single morning session, was showing remarkable progress. His massive frame, once used only for intimidation, now moved with surprising grace. The anger that had driven him for so long was being transformed into something more constructive. Sergeant Cooper called a voice from the parking lot. Chief Roberts was walking down to the swimming hole, accompanied by his teenage son, Jason. The boy looked nervous but determined as they approached the group. Cooper called for a break, and his students bowed respectfully before dispersing to get water or rest in the shade. Gerald stayed behind, helping some of the newer students with their forms. Jason here wanted to talk to you about joining the military, Chief Roberts said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. Thought maybe he could join your morning sessions too, if that's all right. Cooper looked at the teenager, seeing the same mix of uncertainty and determination he'd seen in many young recruits. These sessions aren't just about physical training, he said. They're about building character, understanding yourself, and learning when to use strength and when to show restraint. Jason nodded eagerly. That's exactly what I want to learn, sir. After what happened here, he glanced at Gerald, who was now demonstrating a defensive stance to 2 veterans. Everyone's talking about how you handled those bikers, how you showed strength without violence. I want to be that kind of soldier. Cooper smiled, remembering his own journey from an eager recruit to a Special Forces soldier. Come join us tomorrow morning, he said, 6 a.m. sharp. We'll start with the basics. As Jason and his father thanked him and left, Cooper looked around the swimming hole. The morning sun had burned away the mist, revealing families starting to arrive for their day of swimming and picnicking. The rope swing swayed gently in the breeze, and fish jumped in the deeper parts of the creek. Gerald walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead. Kid's got potential, he said, watching Jason and his father leave. Reminds me of myself at that age, except he's choosing a better path. Cooper nodded. Sometimes people just need to be shown a different way, he said. I had good teachers who showed me that strength isn't about domination. It's about protection, about using your abilities to help others grow. The rest of Cooper's students had gathered their things and were heading to their cars or motorcycles. Many of them had jobs to get to, but they never missed these morning sessions. Each day, they carried the lessons they learned here into their regular lives. Same time tomorrow? Gerald asked, though he already knew the answer. Same time tomorrow, Cooper confirmed. He picked up his worn copy of The Old Man and the Sea from the bench, the same bench where everything had started a month ago. As Cooper watched his students leave, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The swimming hole had become more than just his peaceful retreat. It had become a place of transformation, a place where people came to learn, grow, and find their better selves. He sat down on his bench, opened his book, and enjoyed the morning sun. The The swimming hole was peaceful again, but now it was a peace built on understanding and respect rather than fear. Sometimes, he reflected, the best victories are the ones that don't feel like victories at all. They feel like beginnings.